but what happens is that you actually don't notice something unless it interferes with what you're doing. And because what are you going to do? Notice everything? You can't do that. You can hardly notice anything. So what you do is you pick something to focus on. It's usually something that you value, because why else would you focus on it? So that means that your value system determines the direction of your perception. Bloody well think about that for a minute. That's a Buddhist idea, right? People live in a kind of illusion, and sometimes that illusion causes suffering, and they can transform the way they look at the world, and that can release them from their suffering. But the idea that you do live in an illusion, well, I don't know if it's exactly an illusion, but you certainly do live within a framework of perception that's determined by your values. Now that is so weird, you know, because we never think of the world as something that reveals itself through our values. But of course it does, because you look at what you want. You aim at what you want, and once you've aimed, the world lays itself out for you, and that's exactly how perception works. That's why I represented it this way. You're always somewhere, that's point A, and that's somewhere in some place in some time, and you always have some notion about what you want to have happen next. You know, you're going to go to the next class maybe, you've got a plan after this. In this class you have a plan, you're hoping to learn something, I presume, and maybe you have a goal with regards to a grade, and that's nested inside your desire to get a degree, and that's nested inside your desire to be educated and to have a career and have a successful life. So attending to me at the moment, the reason you're doing that is because all of those values exist within you simultaneously, focusing your attention. And so you're attending to me and not to something else, assuming that all of you with your computers open aren't surfing the web, which you might be, but assuming that you're focusing, whatever you're focusing on is directed by what you value. And some of that can be unconscious. In fact, a lot of it is unconscious, because you know it's very difficult for you to get control of what you pay attention to. You know what that's like. You're trying to study, it's kind of a boring paper. Christ, your attention is just like everywhere, you know. Maybe you'll vacuum under the bed instead of doing the reading the paper, you know. You can't get a grip on that thing, so your attention has an autonomy. And that's another psychoanalytic idea, you know, because you kind of think, well, you're in control. It's like, really? You ever try telling yourself what to do? How does that work for you? I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. Right, sure you are. Yeah, I'm going to quit eating sugar for a month. It's like, how long does that last? It's like 15 minutes, and you're eating like 3 chocolate bars. So, this is Freud's central insight, I would say. You're an autonomous group of spiritual agents, let's say, personalities, and they don't really get along very well. And you, the ego, will say, is by no means necessarily in charge. And that's a very strange thing to realize, but you can really realize that by noticing how little control you have over your attentional focus. Okay, so you've got your point A, you're going to point B, you're always doing that, you inhabit a structure of value, and it changes what the point A is and what the point B is, but the structure itself doesn't change. And when you're looking at the world, what you see is not objects, you see tools, and they make you happy. Those are things that facilitate your movement forward. And you see obstacles, and those are things that make you unhappy. And when you encounter an obstacle, one of the problems is, well, you don't get to where you're going, and that's a problem. But the other problem is, if you encounter an obstacle, the frame might be wrong, right? Because you never know. It might be just something that you could detour around real easily. It might be a fatal flaw in your whole plan. And so obstacles have this dual nature. They get in your way, but they can also take your plan down. And so they can produce anxiety. So my point is, and there's a book called An Ecological Approach to Visual Perception. It's a great book by Gibson, J.J. Gibson, if I remember correctly. And this is, although I thought of this a while back, I realized eventually that it was a variant of his theory, and what he believed was that when people looked at the world, they saw value first and inferred objects second. So for example, for Gibson, if you're standing by a cliff, you don't see a cliff and then think about the fact that you might fall and then feel frightened. You see a falling off place. And part of the seeing of that, part of the act of seeing is being afraid of that. Because your eyes are connected right to your emotional systems. And part of what your eyes do is tell you what the object is. But your eyes do all sorts of other things, like they prepare you for action, they prepare you for gripping, they prepare you for emotion. And none of that actually requires the existence, necessarily the existence of your perception of the object. So there are people who have blind sight, and if you show them, so they think they can't see, but if you flash them an angry face, they'll show a skin conductance response. And that's because the visual pathways to the amygdala, which does facial emotional processing, can still be active. These are people who've usually had a stroke, so their eyes are okay, but they've destroyed the visual cortex. So anyways, it's perfectly plausible that at least at one level of analysis, when you look at something, you see its utility first. So you see a chair, and you might say a chair is an object, but I wouldn't say that. A beanbag's a chair, and a stump is a chair. And they don't share much in common except that you can sit on them. And so, you know, the chair is basically conceptualized by its functional utility, and when you look at a chair, what you perceive is its functional utility, and the chair tells you what to do. It says, sit on me, and there are people who have prefrontal damage, and they engage in something called utilization behavior, and if they're walking down a hallway and there's a door open, they have to walk through it. They can't not do what the object tells them to do. That's called utilization behavior. So that's how the world is laid out. And I would say inside that domain, you're in the predictable world. You're in the world that you understand, that you know, and that if you hit an obstacle or if you're outside that domain, you're in the unknown. You're in unknown territory.